Let's talk about clauses. In order to have a sentence, we have to have an independent clause. So we can combine an independent clause with a dependent clause. So first here's two clauses. I want you to find the dependent clause and the independent clause. Bob is going to do well in the ACT because Bob studied. Which one is the independent clause? Which one is the dependent clause? So the independent clause is the one that can stand alone, which is going to be Bob is going to do well in the ACT. The dependent clause is because Bob studied. Okay? Make sure you understand that, all right? If I end a sentence with the dependent clause, Bob is going to do well in the ACT because he studied. I don't need a comma. Now, you can use a comma if it's like, if you feel it should be there. It's kind of at your discretion, which is frustrating because, okay, I haven't actually ever seen a time when a correctly done comma and a non-comma has been here. So they're not going to do that to you. But what I have seen is a comma there, and I'm like, but that's the end of the sentence. I don't need a comma there. You don't. But you could maybe, perhaps, possibly. Okay? It's super, super confusing, right? It usually happens when the dependent clause is lots of words. Okay? If I put the dependent clause at the beginning of the sentence, I need a comma. Because Bob studied, comma, he's going to do well in the ACT. I can also, and this is rare, but you can put a dependent clause in the middle of a sentence. Bob is, because he studied, going to do well in the ACT. You can do this anywhere. Bob, because he studied, is going to do well in the ACT. Bob is going to do well on the, because he studied, ACT. Now, of course, those sounded a little awkward, but it is okay. You can do no commas. If you put at the beginning of the sentence, you do one comma. If you put it in between the dependent clause, in between the independent clause, you get 2 commas. Okay, let's say we wanted to combine 2 independent clauses. All right, there are 3 correct ways of doing this. We can do a period caps. Independent clause, period, independent clause. Okay? We can do independent clause, comma, fanboys, independent clause. The fanboys is an acronym for and, nor, bore, and, or, nor, but, or, yet, so. Okay? We can do an independent clause, semicolon, independent clause. Okay? I'm studying for the ACT, period, caps, it has taken a lot of my time. I'm studying for the ACT, comma, and it has taken a lot of my time. I'm studying for the ACT, semicolon, it has taken a lot of my time. Okay? Period caps sounds like semicolons, lowercase. You can't really distinguish the difference, which makes it spicy. A lot of your teachers will tell you it's a breath thing. No. I mean, I would follow that advice if you're writing, but you can't know when someone else is thinking a breath, especially when they're writing and you have to edit someone else's writing. You didn't write the test on the ACT and the SAT. So you can't do the breath test because that is very, very subjective, okay? So I am kind of contradicting your teachers here. Don't do the breath test, okay? This will show up oftentimes in which of the following is incorrect, which means there's 3 or 4 correct ways of doing it. They like to test you in semicolons when there's more than one correct way of doing it, okay? So let's look at incorrect ways of doing this. I'm studying for the ACT, semicolon, and. You're never going to use semicolon with a conjunction of any type. So you're not going to use it with a correlating conjunction with and you're not going to use it like the second example with because that's a subordinating conjunction. No conjunctions subordinating or correlating, okay? So I'm studying for the ACT, semicolon, because it has taken a lot of my time is also wrong. I'm studying for the ACT, semicolon, it with a capitalization. Unless it's a proper noun or I, you are not going to capitalize after the semicolon. I am studying for the ACT, comma, it has taken a lot of my time. If you're going to do a comma, you have to do a correlating conjunction, okay? This can get a little bit spicy when on the test So, for example, a lot of times the part that's underlined, meaning the part you need to change, isn't the part you punctuate, okay? So like if you're given a punctuation, like a comma, then whatever follows has to be either a dependent clause or a phrase. Does that make sense? Like if you have an independent clause and a comma, what follows it needs to be, well, it needs to be a phrase. Or that really rare time you use a dependent clause. So a lot of times you're not figuring out what the best thing to do is. You're figuring out what works with what you've been given. Okay? All right. This right here is a very good breakdown of commas. Now, he's a good writer. The Oatmeal is a funny guy. He's a good writer. But see, he does the breath test, right? That's advice on writing. So take that with a grain of salt. Okay, you're not going to be writing, so you're going to be reading. So for example, here, use a semicolon to connect sentences that contain internal punctuation. That is what you should do. But it is technically still correct to use commas instead of semicolons with internal punctuation, and the ACT is trying to trick you. Now, when the Oatmeal writes, or most people write, they're not trying to trick you. They want you to understand them. That's usually what we do when we write, is we want people to understand. But the ACT and the SAT don't want you to understand. They want to trick you. So we'll oftentimes use a comma instead. So basically he's saying, like, let's say you have a sentence here that has a phrase that needs to be offset in commas, and you have a dependent clause at the beginning of the sentence. Okay? Those are two reasons to use commas. And they love to be tricky with two reasons to use commas in the same sentence. Most good writers who want you to understand will use some other punctuation, like a semicolon, or sometimes they will use, like if it's a phrase, so you can offset a positive phrases with commas, but you can also use dashes and parentheses. So when I write a sentence, typically, and I need more than one comma, I will use something else that will work. I will either make a new sentence, use a semicolon, dashes, or parentheses. The ACT does that sometimes, but a lot of times in the same sentence, they'll use a comma for more than one reason. So again, take this with a grain of salt. He's teaching you how to write well, to write to be understood. He's not telling you how to do well on this test, which is to technically watch for someone writing who's intending to try to trick you without actually being technically wrong. Once you get this, your score will go up. You have to get this though, okay? Other than that, this is great. So he does another example where it's in a meta comma. So if you have members of the series like Seattle, Washington, and you need to make a series, you can use a semicolon. So like this right here after Japan is the Oxford semicolon, and in this case, the semicolon after contests is the Oxford semicolon. So that's kind of fun, right? I used to not teach this, and then I saw it on the ACT, literally saw it on the ACT, and then I did see it on the SAT as well. So this could show up. Just, it could be used, like if members of your series need commas, use a semicolon in your series. Okay? All right.